Your soulmate broke down after a secret call. Then they whispered your name. My beloved child. Your soulmate thought they were prepared for that secret call, but the moment they heard the voice on the other end, something inside them collapsed. They stopped speaking. Their hand tightened around the phone, and for several seconds, they simply stared ahead as though one sentence had changed everything they believed. Then the call ended. They lowered the phone slowly, tried to hold themselves together, and failed. Tears came before they could stop them. But what happened next was even more unsettling. In that quiet moment, when they believed nobody could hear them, they whispered your name. Not once by accident. They said it again, softer this time, almost like your name carried the answer to whatever they had just discovered. And here is the mystery: the person who called them wasn't talking about romance at first. The conversation began with something from the past, something your soulmate believed had already been buried. For a long time, your soulmate had been carrying a version of your story that never completely made sense. Certain things they had heard about you. Certain assumptions they accepted because questioning them would have forced them to confront feelings they were desperately trying to control. But during that call, one detail surfaced that didn't match what they had been told. Then another followed. Suddenly, old conversations began replaying in their mind differently. Moments when you stayed quiet instead of defending yourself. Times when you stepped away even though staying might have been easier. Things they once interpreted as distance were beginning to look like restraint. And that realization hit them harder than they expected. Don't skip, because the tears weren't simply about missing you. They were connected to something much deeper: regret. Your soulmate was beginning to wonder whether they had judged your heart using someone else's version of the truth. But the caller still had one final thing to reveal. That was when your soulmate asked the question they had apparently been afraid to ask for a very long time: why didn't anyone tell me this before? There was silence on the other end. A long, uncomfortable silence. And whatever answer followed changed the entire emotional weight of the conversation. Your soulmate stood up, walked toward the window, and tried to steady their breathing. They weren't just learning something about you anymore. They were realizing that a decision they made in the past may have been built on incomplete information. That's why your name escaped their lips after the call. It wasn't random. It was the name connected to the one person they suddenly wished they could speak to without fear, pride, or interference. But they didn't call you. Not yet. Instead, they opened something they had kept hidden for longer than anyone knew, and what was inside may explain why hearing the truth about you finally broke them. The moment they opened what they had kept hidden, their expression changed again. Inside was something connected directly to you, a reminder from a time when the bond between you felt simpler, before misunderstandings and outside voices complicated everything. They had kept it even while pretending they were finished with the past. That alone revealed something they had never been willing to admit: they hadn't truly let you go. But after the secret call, this reminder carried an entirely different meaning. A few words they once dismissed suddenly seemed important. A memory they had pushed aside now matched what the caller had revealed. And then your soulmate noticed one small detail they had overlooked before. It suggested that you may have known far more about the situation than they realized. Yet instead of exposing everything, you remained silent. Why? That question began consuming them, because your silence no longer looked like indifference. It looked like you had been protecting something, or someone. They sat there replaying the past piece by piece, and one particular moment refused to leave their mind. It was a conversation when they expected you to explain yourself, but you didn't. At the time, your soulmate interpreted that silence as proof that the worst things they had heard must have been true. Now they were beginning to understand that your silence could have meant the exact opposite. Maybe you knew that defending yourself would expose another person's secret. Maybe you believed the truth would eventually reveal itself without you destroying anyone to prove your innocence. Whatever the reason, your soulmate suddenly felt the weight of how quickly they had accepted a story without hearing yours completely. Stay till the end, because this is where their regret turned into something stronger. They reached for their phone and opened your contact. Their thumb hovered over your name. For several seconds, they almost called. Then something stopped them. It wasn't pride this time. It was fear. What could they possibly say after everything? I finally understand. I should have believed you. None of those words felt big enough. Your soulmate realized that hearing the truth was only the beginning. Now they had to decide what they were willing to do about it. Then, before they could make that decision, their phone lit up again. The same person from the secret call was contacting them, but this time it wasn't another call. It was a message. Your soulmate read the first line and immediately stood frozen. The message contained a warning. There was still one part of the story they hadn't heard, and this part involved a choice made specifically because of you. Suddenly, the tears from earlier made sense in a completely different way. Your soulmate whispered your name once more, opened the rest of the message, and discovered that someone had been keeping one final truth from them, and that truth could explain why you disappeared when they needed you most. The rest of that message forced your soulmate to question the one memory they had trusted most. They had always believed you stepped away because your feelings changed, because staying connected had become inconvenient, or because someone else mattered more. But according to the person behind that secret call, your distance began immediately after you learned something your soulmate didn't know. You were placed in an impossible position. Speaking openly could have exposed a private situation involving someone close to them, while remaining silent meant allowing yourself to be misunderstood. And somehow, you chose silence. Your soulmate read that part again and again. Suddenly, they remembered your face during your last difficult conversation, the hesitation before you answered, the words you seemed to swallow, the way you looked as though you wanted to explain everything but couldn't. Back then, they called it avoidance. Now it looked painfully different. Then came the detail that made them put the phone down. The caller claimed you had actually tried to protect your soulmate from discovering the truth at the worst possible moment. Not because you wanted to deceive them, but because you believed the timing would cause unnecessary damage. You carried the consequences instead. And your soulmate began realizing how much that choice may have cost you. Don't skip, because this was the moment their heartbreak changed direction. They weren't crying over what happened anymore. They were crying over what they had believed about you afterward. Every cold assumption. Every unanswered message they interpreted the wrong way. Every time they convinced themselves that you simply didn't care. Now one question became impossible to ignore. if you were protecting them all along, why did nobody come forward sooner? The answer was sitting inside the final lines of that message, and your soulmate almost couldn't bring themselves to read them. But they did. And those final lines revealed that the person calling tonight hadn't contacted your soulmate by accident. Something had happened recently that made keeping the secret feel wrong. Someone involved in the original situation had finally admitted that you took blame for something that wasn't entirely yours. Your soulmate's hands began trembling as they reached your contact again. This time, they didn't immediately pull away. They typed a few words, erased them, typed again, then stopped. Something huge is waiting for you, because they weren't afraid of admitting they missed you anymore. They were afraid of what your answer might reveal about everything you endured in silence. And just before they could press send, another message arrived from the caller containing one sentence your soulmate never expected to see. Before you contact them, there is something you need to know about what they did after they walked away. That final warning stopped your soulmate cold, because suddenly contacting you felt like opening a door they could never close again. They stared at the new message, expecting another painful confession, but what they read was strangely different. After walking away, you hadn't immediately moved on the way they had assumed. According to the caller, you quietly checked more than once to make sure your soulmate was okay. You asked about them without wanting your name mentioned. You stayed far enough away to respect the distance between you, yet close enough to know they weren't falling apart. Your soulmate couldn't understand it. If you cared that deeply, why remain invisible? Then another detail appeared. You apparently believed your presence would make an already complicated situation worse. So instead of fighting to be understood, you accepted being misunderstood. And that realization left your soulmate staring at the screen with tears returning to their eyes. But one question still bothered them. How did the caller know all of this? Until now, your soulmate had been so overwhelmed by the revelations that they hadn't questioned the source closely enough. So they finally typed back, asking directly, "How do you know what they did after leaving?" The response didn't come immediately. Minutes passed. Your soulmate paced across the room, checking the phone again and again. Then 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Whoever was writing seemed afraid to finish the sentence. Finally, a short reply arrived, "Because I was there." Your soulmate's breathing changed. This wasn't someone repeating rumors. This person had witnessed at least part of what happened. Stay till the end, because that meant the secret call wasn't simply about correcting an old misunderstanding. Someone who had remained silent was finally choosing to speak, and they had a reason for doing it tonight. Your soulmate immediately asked the question that mattered most: "Why tell me now?" This time, the answer came quickly. The caller explained that something recently changed, something that made them realize silence was no longer protecting anyone. Your soulmate read the next message slowly. Apparently, you had made one final decision after leaving, a decision that proved you weren't waiting around forever, but also proved your feelings had been far more genuine than anyone understood. The caller wouldn't explain everything through text. Instead, they sent your soulmate a time and a place, saying there was something they needed to see with their own eyes before speaking to you. Your soulmate looked at your unfinished message still sitting on the screen, then deleted it completely. Not because they had changed their mind about you. Because now they needed the whole truth first. And when they asked what exactly was waiting at that meeting place, the caller replied with 6 chilling words, something they never meant you to find. By the time your soulmate reached the meeting place, they had imagined 100 possibilities, but none prepared them for how ordinary everything looked. No dramatic confrontation. No crowd waiting with answers. Just the person from the secret call standing there with a small envelope they had apparently kept for a long time. Your soulmate recognized the handwriting before the envelope even reached their hands. Yours. That recognition alone made them hesitate. The caller explained that you had written something during the period when everything between you was falling apart, but you never intended it to become a weapon or an excuse. You had simply needed somewhere to put the truth you couldn't safely say aloud. Your soulmate wanted to open it immediately, yet the caller stopped them with one unexpected sentence. Before you read this, understand that they never asked me to give it to you. Suddenly, this wasn't about a carefully planned reunion. It was about discovering what you believed when you thought your soulmate would never hear it. Their fingers trembled as they unfolded the pages. The first lines weren't accusations. There was no anger, no attempt to make your soulmate feel guilty. Instead, you had written about why you chose distance. You feared that revealing everything would force your soulmate into a painful conflict with someone they trusted, and you didn't want their world destroyed simply so your name could be cleared. Then came a sentence that made your soulmate stop reading. You admitted that being misunderstood hurt, but watching them suffer would have hurt more. Don't skip, because that sentence answered one mystery while opening another. If those were truly your feelings, then why had the caller waited until tonight to reveal the letter? Your soulmate looked up and asked exactly that. The caller's expression changed. There was still something they hadn't admitted, something about their own role in keeping the truth buried. And finally, they confessed. They had once believed silence was the safest choice too. They thought time would erase the damage and everyone would simply move forward. But recently, they learned that your soulmate still carried resentment toward you for something you hadn't fully done, and that realization became impossible to ignore. The caller said they could no longer watch two people live with completely different versions of the same past. Your soulmate lowered the letter, overwhelmed by one painful thought. All this time, they had been waiting for you to explain yourself while you had apparently been waiting for the truth to become safe enough to tell. Then they reached the final page. Most of it had been written long ago, but at the bottom was a short handwritten edition dated much later. Your soulmate stared at that date, realizing you had returned to this letter after everything ended. And beneath it was one unfinished sentence that changed the entire mystery again. If they ever learn the truth about that night, please tell them I never. Your soulmate couldn't move past that unfinished sentence. Please tell them I never what? Never stopped caring? Never blamed them? Never wanted to leave? The missing words suddenly mattered more than everything already revealed. They turned the page over, searching for another line, but there was nothing. Then they looked directly at the caller and asked whether they knew how the sentence was supposed to end. The caller hesitated, and that hesitation said enough. They knew something. Finally, they admitted that you had spoken about the letter later, during one private conversation when you believed there was no possibility of repairing what had happened. You hadn't finished the sentence because finishing it felt like making a promise you couldn't guarantee. But you had explained what you meant aloud. Your soulmate leaned forward, barely breathing, as the caller prepared to repeat the words you had never written. The caller said your unfinished thought wasn't about whether you still loved them. It was about blame. You wanted your soulmate to know that you never blamed them for believing the version of events they were given. You understood why everything looked convincing from where they stood. That revelation broke something open inside your soulmate, because anger would have been easier to face. They could have defended themselves against anger. They could have apologized for it and moved forward. But realizing you had understood their mistake while carrying the consequences alone left them with nowhere to hide from their regret. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate finally understood why your name escaped their lips after that first secret call. You weren't simply the person they missed. You were the person they suddenly realized they had never truly heard. And now, for the first time, they wanted to hear your side without interrupting it with assumptions. They stepped away from the caller and opened your contact again. This time, they didn't type a long explanation. They knew no paragraph could repair years of misunderstanding in a few seconds. Instead, they wrote one simple message: "Can we talk? I know more now, and I want to hear the rest from you." Their thumb hovered over the screen. Then they sent it. For several moments, nothing happened. Your soulmate stared at the phone while every possible outcome raced through their mind. Maybe you had moved on. Maybe you wouldn't answer. Maybe learning the truth had come too late. Then the screen changed. Their message had been seen. Your soulmate whispered your name again, but this time there were no tears, only stunned silence. Because moments later, 3 dots appeared beneath your message. You were typing. Then the dots disappeared. A full minute passed before one short reply finally arrived, and the first 4 words made your soulmate realize there was still one secret left: "I hoped you'd ask." Those 4 words changed the atmosphere completely. "I hoped you'd ask." Your soulmate read them several times, because they didn't sound angry, desperate, or surprised. They sounded like someone who had quietly carried an unfinished conversation for far too long. Before your soulmate could respond, another message appeared from you: "But there is something you still don't know." Their heart sank. After the call, the envelope, and every painful revelation, how could another secret possibly remain? They asked what you meant. Your answer didn't arrive immediately. Those 3 dots appeared, vanished, then returned. Finally, you explained that the night everything fell apart, you had been given a choice nobody ever told them about. You could expose the full truth immediately and clear your name, or you could stay silent long enough for someone close to your soulmate to deal with the consequences privately. You chose silence, believing it would only be temporary. But temporary became weeks. Weeks became distance. And by the time the truth could safely surface, your soulmate had already decided what they believed about you. Your soulmate sat down as the pieces finally locked together. The secret call hadn't created a new story, it had uncovered the missing half of an old one. They realized that both of you had been making decisions based on incomplete information. You believed silence was protecting them. They believed your silence confirmed their worst fears. And the people around the situation allowed those two beliefs to grow farther apart. But then your next message surprised them. You weren't asking for an apology. You weren't demanding that the past be repaired overnight. You simply wrote, "I wanted you to know I never disappeared because you weren't important to me." That sentence brought the tears back. Your soulmate pressed the phone against their chest and whispered your name for the third time that night. Only now, the meaning was different. The first whisper came from shock. The second came from regret. This one came from finally understanding what your absence had actually meant. But the story still wasn't